sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi on the Sidelines. I'm Rabbi Erez Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by a true legend in the sports broadcasting field, in the faith field, a true mensch, as we like to say, just a wonderful person. 7-time Emmy Award-winner from Inside the NBA on TNT, Major League Baseball on TBS, author of an amazing book right here, Unscripted, The Journey of Faith and Sports, and Ernie Johnson. Ernie, it's so great to have you on Rabbi on the Sideline. Thanks for joining.
Erez, thank you so much, man. I've been looking forward to this so much. I can't wait to get going.
Well, I want to actually begin last March because that's when I reached out to you because I realized this faith journey and the sports journey connected. Last March on the set of March Madness with Barkley and Shaq and Andy Katz, VCU was eliminated from the NCAA tournament, not because of basketball, but because of COVID. And I remember everybody was complaining that, oh my gosh, your kids are not going to have this chance to play basketball tomorrow. But then you said, you know, guys, it's just a basketball game. Because tonight I'm going to go home to my son Michael on a ventilator. And I'm going to give him a kiss and realize that he's with me for one more day. And when I saw that, I realized this is way beyond a game. And I reached out to you on my own personal narrative of having a brother with quadriplegic of blessed memory. And I said, I need to talk to this man, of course, about sports, but about faith. Why at that moment did you decide to bring that story to the world of March Madness during COVID, realizing that this was an important story to tell?
I think because it's important for us all to realize that we're kind of, in my line of work, we're in the fun and games department. You know, I began my career as a news guy. You know, I was in the local newsroom, and there you're dealing with things every day that are oftentimes, you know, a life and death situation. And then I was fortuitously switched from the news department to the sports department by a new news director there at WSB in Atlanta way back in the day. And yeah, it was like being transferred to Toys R Us. You know, that's where you're just talking about games and for the most part, it's all, you know, pretty light. You know, there are certainly times where stories come in that require a lot more depth and a lot more feeling than that. But I think it was just at that time that, you know, the whole country, the whole world is going through something that we hadn't gone through before. And I don't know, that just comes out sometimes. It's just, you know, the things that really matter, you can't just put them aside because you're doing a job as a sportscaster. And so that's where that came from. And it's, you know, if my dad taught me anything from his years as a broadcaster, the most basic thing he ever told me was be yourself. And so that was a be yourself moment. That's how it hit me. And I don't think we can be afraid to go there in the midst of wondering how many, you know, points and rebounds per game somebody has, or how many times the team turned it over or anything like that. But yeah, it was a tough time for the VCU team, obviously. Right. But it was in the grander scope, as we all dealt with this pandemic and continue to, it was just something I felt needed to be said.
So let's start with the toys department, and that's basketball, it's baseball, it's golf, right? Yeah. There's the wins and the losses. Obviously, an amazing all-star weekend. We'll talk a little later about the 75 greatest athletes. Maybe we'll talk about the 75 greatest athletes of faith. But what do we get out of sports, especially in today, right? What does it mean to us as a country? Because, you know, you are often the last voice that we hear before we go to sleep.
I apologize for that too. Sorry.
No, it's a blessing. But what is the greater meaning of sports? Yeah,
I've always referred to it as just a pleasant distraction. There's enough going on in the world that we you just need a break. And I think that's what we try to provide, especially on Inside the NBA, you know, where I'm working with Shaq and Kenny and Chuck, that if you've had a rough day, maybe you just need a few minutes where you're going to laugh and watch a couple of knuckleheads clown on each other, you know? And so I don't put it on any kind of a pedestal as, oh, that we're doing the most important thing in the world. We're not. We're just four guys sitting around talking about basketball, and oftentimes when that strays from basketball, that's where the hilarity ensues. And so I just think we are a distraction, and sports on its own, I think, provides a lot of valuable life lessons, no matter how old you are. Things about loyalty and perseverance and overcoming obstacles and that kind of thing. So sports has those messages, but I also just think that, when we do our show, it's, hey, take a break from whatever's, bugging you or dragging you down. And maybe we can give you a little bit of relief here for a few hours when we show you a doubleheader.
So you actually talk about often that it's all improvisation. Obviously you have material. You say that you have more material than we can ever imagine, but just take us maybe just a few moments about, on the set, it's about the game. It's about just four guys, hanging out in the man cave. But what do you try to get across to the audience, whether it's through a game or through conversation?
I think, number one, you know your role on a show. And so I'm sitting here with three guys who have done just about everything conceivable. In fact, they have in a basketball game. So if you want insight into what a team is talking about with 1.6 seconds to go in the game, down by one, these guys know what that is. My role on that is to get everybody their touches, make sure you hear from everybody, and preparation for me is what it's all about. I mean, I keep a daily log of every game played in the NBA. I keep a bunch of my own stats to go along with what Joe Underhill, Underdog as we call him, provides me from his research post. And I'm reading articles and reading quotes and just kind of in my mind saying, boy, if I throw this out there, I know how Chuck's going to react to it. And Shaq will probably do this. So I'm just kind of looking for fodder that's going to further the conversation or spark discussion. And so that's, I think that's kind of how I approach it. And then most of the stuff that happens that maybe people are talking about the next day or blowing Twitter up about is really organic. I mean, there have been times, Shaq once, I referred a few seasons ago to a game that was going on in Oakland between Golden State and somebody. And we're live on the air. And Shaq says, why do you keep saying Oakland? I said, because that's where they're playing the game. And he said, I didn't know that. I thought they always played in San Francisco. and we're like, you played in the league for 15 years. What? And you didn't? He said, no, I go to the hotel, get on the bus, and I thought we were playing in San Francisco. So you can't draw that up in a production meeting. That's right. Just stuff that happens. And so I think that's the beauty of the show. We don't rehearse anything. The guys don't know what's coming next. They don't know what I'm going to ask them. And it's not like we sit down in a commercial break and I say, hey, Michael Malone of the Nuggets had this to say, so have something ready. We don't do that. We want to get gut level reactions, and we just wing it. I mean, we let it fly. It's four guys sitting around watching a basketball game. And so if you over rehearse something like that, it comes off as over rehearsed.
Absolutely.
And then it would eliminate some of those organic moments that we enjoy so much.
Well, in my business, I call it sacred improvisation. Actually, it's very similar in terms of the congregation, the sermonic material. You said the preparation is crucial, but the execution is as important in terms of what the feel of the community actually is.
No, exactly. I know exactly where you're coming from.
So at the same time, you do have some serious moments that you bring to the broadcast booth or the table. I want to play this in 2016, where in our business, politics and religion, we keep apart, and politics and basketball is often kept apart as well. This is a clip that was played, and we'll just hear this, and we'll have to hear your comments about this.
I know you're not supposed to talk about politics and religion, but we're already talking about politics, and so I'm going to go the R direction too. I never know from one election to the next who's going to be in the Oval Office, but I always know who's on the throne. And I'm on this earth because God created me.
So you went the R route. Maybe you can talk about the R route. And again, you brought it there, and tell us what were you thinking in that moment if it was not rehearsed, and why was it important to bring it then?
Well, you know what? It was, we have been unafraid to go off the grid for a sports show in terms of talking about social issues. And I think a lot of that comes from when Charles came on board, because Charles has always been outspoken about everything and has never been shy about sharing his opinions. And so when we do that, we knew going in that, in a 10-minute pregame show, we're all going to have like 2 minutes to talk about the election. And so all I could do, again, was be myself. And I wasn't going to use that 2 minutes to say, wow, can you believe what happened? Wow, what a surprise. Or, something really vanilla. I was going to go where I was going to go, because I heard a lot of people talking, and were concerned and were mad, or they were happy, or whatever. And so I said, here's how I've processed the election. And I went farther than just go the R word. I talked about the fact that, hey, I follow this guy named Jesus. You might have heard of him, and so the whole thing was just me being me, and me being honest with the viewers. And whether or not, I'm not trying to say you need to agree with me or anything like that. I'm just saying this is how I'm processing it. That look, I didn't vote for this guy, but I also realized that the ultimate power does not reside in Washington, D.C. And so that was really at the heart of what I wanted to say. And what was crazy, Erez, is that, I mean, by the time I got back to my office, I just looked at my Twitter feed, and it was exploding. And it was overwhelmingly positive. In fact, our social media folks came downstairs and said, man, people are loving this thing. And certainly there were detractors and people who told me I was out of my mind. And that happens no matter what you do on, on social media. But it was a couple of mornings later that my wife and I were sitting at the kitchen table, just having a cup of coffee. She had her computer open, was looking at Facebook. And she says, geez, so that what you said on Thursday night has got 15 million views. You gotta be kidding me. But I don't know. I think part of that was, I think people were doing just what I was doing. They were trying to process this whole thing, because it was, this was an unprecedented kind of an election. And so maybe some of the things I had to say were just what people needed to hear. I don't know. But I can only assume that. But no, it was that was a powerful moment. That certainly, and I didn't go out there saying, you know what, I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to see if I can break the internet with it. It was It was, hey, be yourself and see what happens.
So we're going to talk about two words, the F word and the G word. That's faith and that's God. And that's because this is really the topic of this book here, Unscripted by Ernie Johnson Jr. And as much as I like the title, I love the subtitle, The Unpredictable Moments That Make Life Extraordinary. We have a common scriptural verse that we say from the Psalms. In Hebrew, I'll say it. Zeh hayom aseh Adonai. This is the day that God made. Let us rejoice in it. And that is the verse that I took out of your book. And it's really because of your journey. So let's start with that faith journey. I know Pastor Myers has been, I would love to meet Pastor Myers one day. Maybe we'll connect shortly. But he brought you to faith. But I love the story that I heard recently of that you went to that church because when you brought your family, specifically your son Michael with muscular dystrophy, there was a place for him to be while the whole family worshiped. Can you take us to your first entry into Pastor Myers' church? And then you also said something about sort of being Moses in the desert. You said it took 40 years to wander to the promised land, and maybe it took you 40 years to get to that moment as well. So take us through the wilderness and how we got to the promised land.
Yeah, I mean, and the more I would tell my story and listen to folks at the church, which was called Crossroads at the time, my story and theirs were almost mirror images a lot. I mean, I grew up going to Catholic school, and you're taught certain things as you grow up and you go to church on Sunday because you got to go to church on Sunday, and then and you're looking at your watch and saying, when's this going to be over, and that kind of thing. So I mean, I was certainly exposed to faith from day one, but I went away to school at the University of Georgia, and I kind of got away from having to get up on Sunday mornings, and honestly, Sunday mornings to me were a great way to sleep off Saturday night, and so I was, I just kind of said, okay, I'm doing fine. And then, and the thing that kind of misleads you, and it is the fool's gold there, is that as I graduate from college and I land my first TV job in Macon, Georgia, and then on to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and then eventually to Atlanta, which is a top 10 market as a news reporter, my feeling that whole time is, hey, I'm doing great, and God hadn't had a thing to do with it. So, that's where I was. And then Cheryl and I, we had 2 kids biologically. She went to Romania and adopted Michael in 91. We adopted a little girl from Paraguay in 1993. So, we've got 2 boys and 2 girls. Great job, great spouse, life's great. And then there just came a time, Erez, where in 1997 or so, I'm just like, is this it? Is this why I'm here? Is this my purpose? Is this where the joy in my life is going to come from? Is from doing this work, and so we decided to kind of explore, and the kids, the kids would be playing with in the neighborhood, and the kids would be talking about, hey, they went to their Bible school, and they went to their Wednesday night service, and they're talking about these characters out of the Bible, and my kids don't have a clue who they are, and then they're saying, hey, how come we don't go to church? And so Cheryl and I were like, okay, look, we're going to try to give these guys some spiritual foundation. And so I looked around. I was out on a Sunday drive, just kind of checking out a few churches that I had seen, and I stopped by this non-denominational, and to me that was a, what do you mean non-denominational? Okay, so I checked this place out, and it looked like, hey, this might be doable. And this is when we find out that, they have a person who takes care of special needs kids. Wow. Because, Michael's, it's hard for him to get around, and he needs attention. And so we said, we'll try it out. And the funny thing is, we go there to give the kids some spiritual grounding.
Right.
And that first Sunday I'm in there, Kevin Myers is preaching, and he's just got this wonderful way. I mean, and he's just a guy like me, he's married, he's got a few kids, and he's about my age, and knows the Bible back and forth, but he made it so relevant. And I'm sitting here just being pierced where I'm sitting, because he's talking about, who's the provider in your life? And
yes.
Are you pursuing wholeness or happiness? And I'm like, I'm the provider, and I'm looking for happiness. And it's like, okay, you missed those first 2. And so I just dug deeper into that. And then a few months later, I just, the church was pretty small at that time. You could talk to Kevin after every service. And I was like, God's messing with me, man. What am I doing? And he said, well, let's sit down and talk. We went for lunch at a place called O'Charlie's, and I had this southern fried chicken salad with honey mustard on the side and a sweet tea. And at that same lunch, we just kind of joined hands, and I prayed to accept Jesus Christ into my life. And it changed everything for me, and it gave me a purpose, and it allowed me to see that even in those years when I wasn't paying a bit of attention to God, he had his eye on me.
Yes, I love that. When we weren't paying attention to God, God was paying attention to us. And you write in your book, trust in God, period.
Yeah.
Trust in God, period. And you have a clip that I'm not going to show right now, but in telling Michael's story, I believe it was to the employees of Turner, that you talk about the woman at the Romanian orphanage that basically says, don't take this one. Don't take this one. And Cheryl actually calls and says, we're taking Michael. And you provide, as you said, are you the provider? Are you finding happiness or wholeness? In the life and the years that Michael was given to you on this earth, how did you find that wholeness in his life that was often physically broken?
Yeah, I mean, you go back to that day in the orphanage, because I'm at home, I'm in Atlanta, and I've got Eric and Maggie, at that point, our two kids, and we're going totally unscripted at this point. We're saying, if you stick to the script, it's like, hey, mom and dad, a boy and a girl, don't mess with it. And this is what this is what folks want. But Cheryl had been so drawn to the plight of these Romanian orphans by watching an ABC News 2020 that, we decided, let's add to the family and let's give a kid another shot. And she went over there with no idea if she would come back with a child or anything like that. I mean, the situation was very unsettled there, but it was, that's exactly what happened. I mean, the first orphanage she goes to, they bring this little kid out who's nearly 3 years old and can't walk or talk and has a foot that's totally turned in. He makes noises the nurse who handed Michael to Cheryl Ann said, don't take this boy, he's no good. And I mean, in that phone call, when she called, she said, hey, we need to talk, about this boy and about whether we're willing to do this. She said, I just can't go the rest of my life wondering what happened to this little blonde-haired boy. And I said, bring him home. And I think that's one of those things where, look, at that point, this was 1991. This is 6 years before I had that lunch with Kevin Myers. Wow. And so people have this impression sometimes that, oh, you guys have been these Christians for all your lives. And and that's what let you know. I said, no, we weren't labeled. We were just kind of floating out there at this time. We just knew this was the thing to do. And that's what points out to me, I think, that sometimes that's divine. Those are the divine moments where God's like, I'm going to put Cheryl in Romania and I'm going to put her at this orphanage and she's going to meet this kid. And it's tough for us to comprehend that kind of a thing and that kind of a connecting of the dots. But that's what we wanted to do. And I think that's part of the thing that in 1997 reminded me that he was looking at me when we weren't looking at him. And this is the thing about raising a special needs child like Michael, who he wasn't supposed to get out of his teens when you got muscular dystrophy, and many families out there know that's look, there's no cure, and so you don't know how long you're going to have him. Somehow he lived 33 years, 30 of the last 30 of them with us. But what his presence did, and where the wholeness comes in too, is that when Cheryl and I woke up in the morning, we were immediately put into a servant mentality. Michael needed everything done for him, especially the last 15 years of his life when it was very tough for him to move. So anything he needed in the morning, I mean, you take him to the bathroom, you give him a shower, you do all those things. And one of the most, it's going to seem really insignificant to you, but just the mere act of scratching him somewhere because he's got an itch. Think of how many times during the day we do that. We just we unconsciously do it. Something itches, you go like this. He couldn't do that. And so it was everything, man. It was everything he needed. And so I think that just responding to that need for us to serve is huge. Because it takes we get so tied up in our own agendas all the time. And it was a perfect way for us to say, our agendas can wait. And I think that was a life lesson for us.
So I relate on so many different levels. Many of my audience watching knows my own personal narrative of my brother Eyal of blessed memory, quadriplegic for 32 of his 36 years. I relate to actually many of your children who are siblings of special needs individual, watching my mom and my dad be those caretakers, be those servants, but also knowing how much was given back to our family, knowing that even 5 years later after his passing, the impact that he continues to have. The fact that I reached out to you because of my brother, because of Michael, I see that connection is what I really, the blessings that we try to continue to bring as well. And you mentioned, or I'm going to mention Psalm 23, which actually in the Jewish tradition we say at the house of mourning. But you mentioned in something that I heard that you talk about, we have to be grateful. If we're going to be grateful for the mountaintops, we also have to be grateful for the valleys. And when I heard that, I immediately went to Psalm 23. When I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. You are my rod and my staff, and you comfort me. I don't know if that psalm was the impetus of you saying that, but maybe you can say just a few things about, you've reached the mountaintops. You are every kid who sits in this chair who becomes a bar mitzvah. When I ask them what they want to be, they either want to be Shaquille O'Neal or Ernie Johnson, right? I'm sitting in this chair saying, great, you can be the next Ernie Johnson. That's the mountaintop. But how do you deal with the valley, and how do you balance those two as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really heavy question. And I think only when you go through both do you have some kind of a comprehension of it. And so look, dealing with Michael was one thing. He brought us such an incredible amount of joy because of his some of the limitations he had, in terms of developmental delays and that kind of thing, in addition to the muscular dystrophy. But, his whole thing, he had this kind of a Rain Man-like memory of cars. He could tell you you tell him what you drive, he'll never forget it. You could see him 10 years later and he'd tell you what you drove. But he also said, love you too.
Yes.
And I think that's because he was being raised in a household, our household, where that was said all the time. Mm-hmm. You couldn't get away without hearing, hey, love you too. But he kind of adopted that as his favorite thing to do. And like in a time of silence around the house, he would just see him say, Daddy, love you too. And he was so excited with just the smallest bit of kindness you would show. You could make his day by just laminating pictures of cars that he could look at while sitting in his wheelchair. Mm-hmm. Or just making him a playlist so he could listen to the music he likes in his headphones. And I think he taught us that too, to be satisfied with what you have and not always say, hey, what's the next thing I need, or this will make me happy. And I think that was a great lesson. It is his simplicity, mm-hmm. And his sweetness of spirit were contagious and rubbed off on us. And what we would do is, it was, people would say, oh, what you've done for him. And I said, no, it's what he's done for us.
Yes.
And that's huge. And so, when you talk about the valleys and the mountaintops, and you can have professional success, and then you can also have a doctor look across the table at you and say you got cancer. Mm-hmm. And so I've been through that twice.
Yeah,
had a doctor look me in the eye and tell me twice, and so I think in following with Scripture, I have been able to be content in every circumstance. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to let that steal my joy. And I realized through all of those trials, through the mountaintops, through the valleys especially, that I'm being formed into the man I'm supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so get me straight here. From my standpoint, sure, you don't want to be diagnosed with cancer. You don't want a child to be diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. But at the same time, those experiences have made me the man I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you say, could you take those away? I don't know that I could,
Right.
because I don't want to picture who I would be if everything went according to the way I wanted it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so we accept those things as part of our lives, and God never promised that I will, hey, if you trust me, and if you'll make a commitment to me, you'll never have a problem in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, but he did promise that during those times he'd walk it with me, and I'm finding that out right now. I mean,
yes,
there is, we're about 3.5 months since we lost Michael,
mm-hmm.
and that walk is easier than some days than it is others, because some days I'm really limping.
Mm-hmm.
But he's with me, and he's walking me through it on our whole family.
Absolutely. I want to go back to what you said about Love You Too, because that really just struck me. I know you gave an impassioned speech to Alabama with Nick Saban. I love the line that you said, when Nick Saban calls, it's not yes or no. It's what time will I be there?
Yeah, exactly.
But that speech was also given to the Turner employees. And I just want to share a little clip about Michael and the basketball team. Again, we're just getting to know each other. But actually, when I was in high school and my brother was in a wheelchair and he wasn't on my varsity basketball team, but he never missed a game. And there was one game where we have a very small gym in Syracuse, New York. And literally with his electric wheelchair, I don't know why he did this, but drove on the court and it stopped the fast break and we won the game. I'll never forget that miracle that happened. When you said God provides miracles, it happens on the court too. But this is Michael and Love You Too and what it means in terms of finding value in everybody.
And he gets out there and they give him his blanket and stuff. And the crowd cheers, and I look up in the student section and they're standing like this. Don't take boys no good. He had done more through that point in his life and impacted more folks than I could ever hope to. Because there is value inside everybody. May not be able to do things the way we all do it. May have a different strength and different weakness and that kind of thing, but there's always value. Find it. Find it in those you work with. Don't stress out over the things that bug you. Find that value and latch on to it.
So take us back to the 5-foot impact player on that basketball team and why the coach brought him onto the team to find value in everybody. In a world today where we have very, very difficult time finding value in anybody, you say find value in everybody.
Well, I think it was, when Michael was in high school, he went to this brand new school that turned into this huge, it's one of those high schools that could double as a small college, thousands of kids there. And the basketball coach they hired there at Mill Creek High School left his job in Indiana to take this job in Brazelton, Georgia. And he was a really good coach. And basketball, in Indiana, basketball is king, so he's gonna leave basketball country and come down to football country down here in Georgia, where football on Saturday is religion.
Yeah.
And he's going to be the basketball coach. And so he was just in the hallways of the school one day and heard this wheelchair and followed it into the special needs classroom. And that's where he, and he's this guy, Phil Beaulieu, is just engaging and has this just magnetic personality. So he just pokes his head in there to see who this guy was, and he meets Michael, and Michael quizzes him about what kind of car he drives, obviously. That's always the first question. And then Phil's like, "Hey, good to meet you," and he turns to leave, and Michael hits him with this "Love you too, coach." Mm-hmm. And that kind of stopped Phil in his tracks. And the next thing I know, I've got a letter in Michael's backpack when he gets off the bus saying, "My name is Phil Beaulieu. I'm the head basketball coach, and I need your son on my team." and we met over at the high school, and I'm okay. I said, "Tell me what's up. What are you thinking?" I said, "Have you noticed that, this isn't decoration. He needs that wheelchair to get around. So I don't know how much he's going to help your team." He says, "No, he's going to be my 5 foot tall impact player with no vertical leap."
Yes.
He says, because I think he's got a wonderful heart, and I want him to teach my team maximum effort, because everything it took at that point took him everything he had strength wise just to drive his chair. And he said, and that "love you too" thing, he says he has a great heart for others. So that's what I want him to teach my team. So Cheryl and I were like, "Yeah, we're in. That's great." And so he would sit behind the bench, did that for 3 seasons. And Michael doesn't know if the ball's blowing up or stuffed. He couldn't care less, who wins the game or any of that stuff. He just loved hanging around with the guys. Mm-hmm. And he could tell them every car that they drove. And one of the funniest things is that they'd go around the room in the locker room talking about what they drive. And he asked a player who was in 9th grade, he said, "What do you drive?" And he said, I don't drive, I take the bus." And Michael started laughing. It was like, and then the whole team just, piled on this kid because he cracked Michael up. But, Phil was talking about Michael's impact while he was teaching class. I mean, he'd stop in the middle of a history class and say, "I got to tell you a story about this guy, Michael Johnson." And he would tell Michael's story from Romania. And he's the way he put it, he said, "Hey, we got a lot of sign language going on in this high school in the hallways." He said, "and most of it involves one finger, and the kids were all like, 'Yeah, that's true.' And he said, 'Well, instead of that, try this.' He says, 'Anybody know what that is?' And, get funny looks. And he said, it's "I love you too." It's "I love you." It's "I love you." And if you poke your index finger, tilt the index finger at somebody, it's "I love you too." And so he was teaching that while he was teaching class. And that's what led to the student section standing up like this on senior night.
That's amazing. So on NBA and TNT, we talked about politics just for a moment and how you being you. We talked obviously about the special needs world, the inclusion world as well. Just a couple of weeks ago on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, you did something that was spectacular. Over these past 2 weeks, there was some controversy in terms of actually the book Mouse being in Tennessee, being taken off a book list because it was too controversial to teach Holocaust to children. And you, during halftime of an NBA game, as you just said, sports should be a distraction to the people. You brought up International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And in fact, you brought a guest and a friend of mine, Dan Grunfeld, and his book, By the Grace of the Game. And you told that story. And I want to just share, after you told the story of Dan Grunfeld, Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal said something unbelievable. And I want to do this clip that we're going to share right now. I want people to see this, and then maybe you can give us a little commentary on the commentary. So we're going to play that clip right now.
It's something that every kid should learn about. Obviously, I've learned a lot about it over my years, but every kid should learn about it. I mean, there's some crazy people out there who said it doesn't exist. They're just crazy. But I think all young kids should learn about that, in my opinion.
Growing up in West Germany, we took a trip to a place called Dachau. Mm-hmm. And that's where I first learned about the Holocaust. And they still have, items, ovens, and, the barracks and the places where they held the Jewish people. And I was really saddened by it. So, to all my Jewish friends, Shalom, Barak Hashem, B'Shana Tova.
The most I have learned about the Holocaust was a book that, in fact, I just read it 4 months ago. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I would recommend it highly to anybody who wants an insight into what that was like, written by a survivor, a doctor, and just the atrocities and the horror that people went through. And then the struggle once you are freed. entering back into society with some freedom when there was a time when you had no hope. It's a fascinating read. But again,
So we're gonna stop that clip for a moment, and like that's unreal. In the middle of a game, you bring up the Holocaust. It's obviously Holocaust Memorial Day. Obviously, Dan Grunfeld, son of the great Ernie Grunfeld, who was the only sort of child of Holocaust survivors to play in the NBA. And then Shaquille O'Neal starts saying that in high school he's living in Germany and going to Dachau, one of the concentration camps. What was the preparation, I guess, to get to there? And perhaps what impact were you trying to have on the public watching that day?
Well, we had run a piece just prior to that conversation. And I got to credit Adam Lefko, who's our host on Tuesday nights. And Adam is just, they don't get any better. He's an extremely talented broadcaster, but just a good man. And he and Dan had sat down and talked about the book. And so we had this piece ran on the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so this piece ran and talked about the book. And then our discussion came out of that. And so that was the opportunity just to point that out and say, hey, this is great work by Dan, great work by Adam, and what meaning it had for us. And again, that's our show. I mean, that's, we don't have to stick to, did the Clippers beat the Bucks? It's like, this is important. This is vital. It's tough for me to say, look, it took me that long before I read the book, before I read Viktor Frankl's book.
What was the inspiration to read that book for us?
You know what? I've got some close neighbors who live near us over here in Brazelton. And we were all together by the fireplace one night, just kind of sitting around talking. And somehow that book came up.
Wow.
And my buddy, who's a little older than I am and has been a coach at the college level and in the NFL for years and years, his name is Rip Shearer. He's an awesome dude. And so Rip says, oh, no, I mean, man, you got to read Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl, he said, I read it, back when I was a teenager. And I'm like, okay, I need to do this. And so I did. I got a hold of the book, and it's just so rich, and it's and taught me so much. I mean, there were things. I mean, I thought I knew what was going on there, and then when you hear his stories of how some of his friends actually were recruited as being part of their captors, that it was commonplace for men who knew each other, one to be beating the other, your friend. And it was mind-blowing to me. But then the way he unpacked how this hopelessness was just, at a certain point, the hopelessness was just, that's all there was. And where he found that unless you had something else to latch onto, that's the only way you were able to stay away from that hopelessness. And then as he talks about the day they're freed, and then coming to grips with that, it was awesome. It was an awesome read, and just as profound as it gets.
Actually, there's the whole day of freedom and liberation, and you said captiveness. I mean, it goes into everything they were speaking about. It goes into faith. It goes into how we can be free. Actually, every single morning in our prayer book, we say in Hebrew a blessing, thanking God, Matir Asurim, for freeing the captive. And it doesn't mean the person behind bars. It means our soul who is entering the world right now, and through the way that you live your life, and the way that you, when you said that God put Michael, into those situations, or that basketball coach from Indiana to Georgia, I would say that God has put you in these positions, and you often speak about that as well, that like, did God put me in this broadcast position to do a halftime show, or did he put me in this position for when there are times that we can access faith? And I remember you also said, I've done a lot of awesome research on your faith, is you said, we don't push it in people's faces, right? We start with that relationship. It becomes a sacred relationship. And then you realize there is those moments when God can easily be brought into our lives. And I think that's an important piece of what you have done as well. I want to ask two more questions. One actually is from somebody watching. It's a little off topic, but it deals with, I think, maybe your expertise on that the NBA and this. I think faith and race also have a lot to do with each other in terms of, as your shirt says, be a better human being. I think that's exactly what we
be a
need to
better
do.
human.
Exactly, right? And one of those is by bridging differences through sports. Somebody is asking, in the NBA, there's been success in minority coaching hires, but like in the NFL, it's a little more difficult. Maybe just your take on that if you have a few seconds to do that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an issue without question. I think the NBA has done an outstanding job with it. I mean, you're talking about a league that, is predominantly black and black head coaches are represented around the league. The NFL has been a different story, obviously, and I think you've seen a lawsuit filed, and I would hope. Look, my hope is that the NFL would make this more than just lip service to an issue, and so we're going to do better. Well, you can't just say you're going to do better; you must do better, and so that's it basically. I mean, you've heard people talking about this for weeks and weeks, and I have nothing really to add to that aside from the fact that there's a problem there. Fix it.
You got it. And then this past weekend, All-Star Weekend, obviously you did an amazing job on the bongos. Just want to point that out. But the 75 greatest NBA players of all time were honored. And I asked you earlier, is there a top 5 group of players of faith that you maybe have seen that lead to be a better human being? And I don't mean just the faith in God, but maybe how their actions actually meet their beliefs, or what you've seen in the locker room, off the TV, things that we don't see that you say, you know what, this person is a person of faith that can also help us lead.
Wow. That's a hard question.
It's all improvised, right? That's what you say. Be you.
Yeah, it is. and I would hate to, and I would really hate to name somebody or say, well, this guy's really got great faith. I mean, I don't know enough guys that tightly in the league to say, oh yeah, this guy's, but I mean, I think Steph's a guy of great faith. Magic Johnson is, Magic every year at the beginning of when we do the Legends Brunch, which is like my favorite part of All-Star Weekend, where they're all gathered and we, some awards are given out and that kind of thing. But every time Magic takes the podium, I'll introduce, hey, you're this time All-Star, this kind of Finals MVP, et cetera. And he always says, good morning. God is good, isn't he? And it's, and I love that. I think rather than pinpoint a bunch of guys in the league, there are a bunch who are unashamed to point out that, hey, God's got me here, and they'll point it out in a post-game interview. They'll point it out by what they do in the community, by putting others first, by serving. And so rather than try to list guys and say, these guys are really, I would just say the number is many, and it would be impossible for me to knock it down to a top 5.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so a closing message, perhaps a faith, perhaps a blessing. As I said, children love sports. Adults love sports. As I said earlier, you are the distraction, but the blessing that you give us through what you do, through Shaq, through Barkley, through Smith, through everything that you do. And first of all, I have to say you do it through love, but also this morning we have seen that you do it through faith. And first of all, from our own community, from me personally, just comfort to you and your family. I know during this difficult time of mourning and grief, knowing that we, the American people who watch you every single night, really stand with you as well. And so that's our blessing to you. And perhaps to conclude, you want to give us a blessing to continue on our faith journey going forward.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, I know we get so tied up with the things that we have to do on a day in, day out basis. And we get so it can all be, you're just trying to stay afloat sometimes. And it's tough sometimes to look out at others rather than look in at what your agenda is. And we're always in a hurry. One of my favorite, I mean, he's called a philosopher, he's called a theologian, is Dallas Willard, the late Dallas Willard, who, there was a book I read by John Ortberg, who was a pastor at Menlo Park out in San Francisco area. And he was tight with Dallas Willard and wrote a book called Soul Keeping, in which it just talked about the value of the soul and to maintaining it and the key, Dallas Willard said, the key to the biggest roadblock to the spiritual life is hurry. And he said, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life.
Yes.
And when I read that, I was like, wow, because you know what that does? When you're in a hurry, everything's about me. It's like, I need to get here to make my flight. I need to get down here for this meeting. I need to. And when you're not in a hurry, then you recognize if you're looking to your left and your right and you're unhurried, you're recognizing that person at work who just needs 2 seconds of your time because they're struggling. It's noticing the person who just looks like they need a word or needs just to be acknowledged, have their name said, without, and not just a cursory, how you doing? See you, but to be available. And I'll tell a quick story before I split, or before you kick me out.
Never. Is that
we can all make people's lives better. And I think that's what we're here to do. And it doesn't need to be always some kind of this huge orchestrated effort that's going to take all this preparation, and I hope to get to that. It can just be a moment. And so the story I'm going to tell you is, I buy my wife flowers all the time. And I'm not trying to guilt out any husbands out there or anything like that and say, this is what I do, so you got to do it. So when I'm at the grocery store, I'll pick up some flowers, bring them home for her. So this happened probably 3 or 4 years ago, where I was in and I bought 2 bouquets. I don't know what I had done that week where I felt compelled to get 2 bouquets for my wife. I don't remember.
We'll bring Cheryl on the next time.
Yeah. So I go outside and I'm putting my groceries away and putting those flowers away. And I see an elderly woman in a handicap spot who's putting a few groceries away. And I'm thinking, and sometimes you just get this little nudge, and it's not somebody standing next to you, but it's somebody from above who's giving you a little nudge and say, hey, Cheryl Ann doesn't need both of those. But I think you could probably share one of those with this woman who's, putting the stuff away in the handicap spot. So I walked over to her and I said, look, I can't explain why I'm doing this, but I just feel like you should have these. And she looked me dead in the eye and said, I lost my husband a year ago today, and I haven't gotten flowers since. And it's at moments like that where you say, okay, don't tell me it's a coincidence. There are divine appointments. There's a reason that you had to be at Publix at this time when this woman was at Publix at this time. And so now every time I get my wife flowers, I buy an extra one.
Wow.
And so and I go through the parking lot. Sometimes it's right there. Sometimes I got to make another trip. Somebody comes out, but there's always somebody. And I'll say, hey, look, you're the winner. I always buy one for my wife. Here's an extra one. That's for you. And you would be amazed at how many times it has come at a time when that person needs that the most, where it's, wow, thanks for that. My husband's been out of work for the last 7 months, or I was just, I just came in here today because I needed to get some flowers to bring them to somebody's house. I said, well, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's powerful. And I think when you're not in a hurry and when you're able to try to put others first and not think about your agenda, some amazing things can happen that make the world a better place. And I'm not saying you got to spend $15 on flowers all the time. Sometimes it's just hold the door open. Sometimes it's, can I help you with that?
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a word of encouragement. And I think if we all can do that, instead of saying, hey, this will be a great day to get on Twitter and eviscerate somebody, that would be, I think that's a step in the right direction. So the last quote I'll give you.
Please.
I was walking. I was in Boston. I think I was either covering the Red Sox or the Celtics in a playoff series, but I had a day off, and our hotel was right across from one of those. They have great parks in Boston, Boston Common and other places where lots of green grass and trees and statues and history and that kind of thing. And I'm walking through there, and I see this one statue just caught my eye because it was kind of an older guy with a cane, walking through like a garden, and I'm looking at it and saying, who's this dude? It's Edward Everett Hale, and it's a patriot and a preacher of the gospel and a man of letters, it says. But there's this quote, and from him, and it says, look up and not down, look forward and not back, look out and not in, lend a hand. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Then I find out, well, there's a Lend a Hand Society in Boston, too, that takes its name from this guy. But I think it's just great daily advice, for everything I need. I look up, nothing I can do about the past. I look forward. Don't look in, look out, and lend a hand. It sounds simple. Obviously, it's not as easy to do that, judging from the world we live in. So that would be my encouragement to you and everybody else out there as we, as we go from day to day, because you never realize just the power of one little moment. It may seem insignificant, may change somebody's life entirely, and that's the exciting part of it. That's the expectancy of it. That what's this day going to hold? What's 5 minutes from now going to hold? When I stumble into some divine appointment, that's the power of it.
This is the day that God made. Let us rejoice in it.
And be glad in it.
Yes, and we are so happy and rejoicing right now because Ernie Johnson has spent just this hour with us here on Rabbi on the Sidelines. Emmy Award-winner, author of this book. If you have not read this book, you must. Unscripted by Ernie Johnson Jr., a story of faith, a story of inspiration, really a story of how to live our life. So today, slow down. Take a moment to realize that this day that God has given us is a day that we must rejoice in it. Ernie, it is a pleasure to see you. We look forward to being in touch. God bless.
Erez, it's been my pleasure.
Love you too.